My name is Charles L. Brown, better known as Charlie Brown. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. I spent approximately 23 years in military service and the latter 7 years as a senior Foreign Service officer. In my career, I spent about 15 years abroad. I started out as an enlisted man in the Army, in the West Virginia National Guard in the fall of 1939, enlisted in the regular U.S. Army in the Signal Corps in June of 1940 upon graduation from high school. Started training as a pilot in July of 1942, was commissioned as a second lieutenant pilot in April of 43. Trained as a B-17 pilot aircraft commander, went to Europe, arrived there early November of 1943, commenced combat as a B-17 pilot on 13 December 1943, flew my 29th and last complete mission on the 11th of April 1944. Combat during this period was fairly severe. I just completed a survey of my 31 attempts at missions, and every time we went into the air, we had 235 casualties during those 31 missions. And anyway, very fortunate to complete it. Ferried aircraft around the United Kingdom for 2 or 3 months, came back to the States as instructor pilot, volunteered for overseas again, and then went out to the Pacific as a C-54 pilot. Flew into China, Burma, India. Left the service December of 45, 1 year of college, very bored, back into the Army for a year, went to Japan as a military police officer and ended up commanding a counterintelligence unit. Out of the service in 1947, the fall, in order to complete college. Finished college in August of 49, recalled to active duty in October of 49, given a regular Air Force commission in early 1950, left active duty in the fall of 65, gave up my promotion to colonel to accept an appointment as a senior Foreign Service officer. Served 7 years with the Agency for International Development, 6 of those 7 years being spent in Southeast Asia as a regional inspector for the agency. Basically because of my counterintelligence training and police work in an outfit called Office of Special Investigations. Since I had one of the few pilot-trained investigators, I ended up doing a lot of investigations of unusual aircraft accidents in which sabotage was suspected, and as a consequence became acquainted with some outstanding scientists and worked with the Air Technical Intelligence Center on a project called Grudge. At that time, Office of Special Investigations was a worldwide investigative unit in the Air Force, and were given the responsibility of investigating what became known as unidentified flying objects. The title within the center was Project Grudge. My job was the district DO5 of Wright-Patterson. We received these worldwide reports, and my job was to hand carry these reports over to the technical center and coordinate them with the project officer, answer any questions from an investigative viewpoint that I could assist on. And I did that for approximately 2 years until the fall of 1951. When I left Wright-Patterson, Colonel Dunn was nice enough to give me a 2-page letter of appreciation for my work with Project Grudge. And so far as I know, that is certainly one of the early formal recognitions of work of an Air Force officer with Project Grudge. Now, the behind-the-scenes efforts that could have been going on simultaneously, fortunately, I was not privileged to. But I did gain a feeling in that many of the investigations were never answered. Normally in the investigative field, you have an allegation of something, or in the case of a UFO, a sighting, let's say, you carry it through to its conclusion and a result. And in many of those instances, although it's been a long time ago, I do know that there were no viable scientific results. And as a consequence, it developed my interest, or it sort of piqued my curiosity, if you will, into the aspect of unidentified flying objects. Having spent several hundred hours in the air at that point, I followed it throughout the rest of my Air Force career. And in Tactical Air Command, I was the coordinating officer between the Deputy for Intelligence and Continental Army Command, which at that time had responsible for the missile defense of the United States. And so there were 2 or 3 instances in which I was called over there. Well, even though Langley was very close to Fort Monroe, normally my transit time, even with one time with the military police escort, was still about 12, 14 minutes. And when an object is moving a few thousand miles an hour, 12, 14 minutes is a tremendous amount of lost time. So I was never fortunate enough to see the actual tracks. But I do remember speeds in excess of 4,000 to 5,000 miles an hour, which were far in excess of any known aircraft that we had or any of the enemies. And being an intelligence officer, one of my responsibilities was to have at least a rough idea of enemy capabilities and of their equipment. We flew into, I think it was Las Vegas, Nellis Air Force Base, and another pilot and I were driving a Goonie Bird. And normally the sky out there is either very bad or very clear. And we were coming up out of there, and I glanced up and the sky was totally clear. And an object went across from probably southwest to northeast, and it transited the entire heaven. Looking at it from my right, went out of sight on the left in probably less than 15 seconds. It was moving at a speed that I couldn't even begin to calculate. It was certainly no satellite. It was not a satellite orbit. It was a controlled craft and things like that. Some of the objects reported were tracked on radar. We had objects with 4-way confirmation: ground visual, ground radar; airborne visual, airborne radar. And so far as I'm concerned, you don't get no better than that. You're not talking about someone's imagination. And in the time frame, I heard so-called experts that the Air Force brought in, and one thing and another, from swamp gas to things like that. Anyone who flies as a profession, an airline pilot, private, Air Force, Army, Navy, military, whatever, you're exposed to literally hundreds of objects in flight that are not always clearly discernible. But normally there's a flight pattern that takes place. If it's an aircraft with wings and the laws of aerodynamics apply, you don't stop that thing and reverse it in an blink of an eye. And things like that did occur. It's, I don't know, it's sort of strange, but we send people to prison. We send people to their death because of eyewitness accounts of crimes. Our legal system is based on that to a large degree. Yet, in my following of unusual aerial phenomenon for the past 50 years, there seems to be some reason to discredit very viable and very reputable witnesses when they say something is unidentified. Well, you show me the individual that can identify everything in the heavens, and I will show you the second coming. Just that simple. Because I don't care how technically qualified you are, and for someone who is not there to voice an opinion, oh, they saw such and such and such and such. Every time I see a special on UFOs or unidentified phenomena, you always have experts. And my question is, when did they get off? What was the stop that dropped them, that qualified them to be experts? And I have a real problem with that. I truly believe that phenomena have been visiting this planet long before Project Grudge. I think there's adequate evidence of it. And the more we learn about the planet, the more we learn how little we truly know. And so the advance of science is something that has to keep evolving, and we have to keep learning. And I get real discouraged when I hear people, they think they know it, if you will. The old expression is a know-it-all, when really all they are doing is expressing their ignorance without knowing it. I do not remember much of that, and I would do very little in terms of looking at gun camera film, for example. Photographs I tried to do rather well on.
But had you heard that they exist?
I had every reason to believe they existed, but I also had reason to believe that the gun camera film was handled very carefully, not for general observations. President Truman, who was a rather direct